Hello, everybody, and welcome to Friends of the Force, a Star Wars podcast. I am your host, Brad Whipple. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of From a Certain Point of View, our interview series where we chat with the creators and those involved in the galaxy far, far away. Our guest today is a new author in the Star Wars universe as of this summer. Her previous work includes the Heroine Complex series, as well as a variety of short fiction and comic books. Within Star Wars, she most recently penned the Dr. Aphra audiobook original from Del Rey Publishing, so I'm super excited to welcome Sarah Kuhn to the show. So without further ado, let's get right into the interview.
So what I told you was true, from a certain point of view.
A certain point of view?
Luke, you're going to find that many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Friends of the Force from a Certain Point of View. So happy to be joined by the author of Dr. Aphra, an audiobook original, Sarah Kuhn. Sarah, how is it going today?
Good, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me. And as I told you before we started, Dr. Aphra, the audiobook, has just been such a blessing in so many ways for Star Wars fans, whether they're new to Aphra or familiar with her. But I think it was just there was such a great conversation happening around this character, and the production quality and the story and everything is just so amazing. So congratulations on writing your first Star Wars story and really joining that universe of writers.
Thank you very much.
How have you seen the reception of the book, and what's it been like to finally put those words out into the universe and see everybody get so excited over it?
Oh, I mean, it's extremely cool. I don't see how it could be anything but that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really great. It's lovely to hear from people. I have really enjoyed hearing from both people who were big fans of hers, ever since she was introduced, and also some people who are coming into it fresh. So it's really cool to see both perspectives.
And I know you've talked a little bit about your history with Star Wars. I know you were on the San Diego Comic-Con at Home panel, which was a lot of fun. But can you speak a little more to your personal history with Star Wars? And I know specifically Princess Leia had a tremendous impact on you growing up.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I've loved Star Wars pretty much. It feels like for as long as I've been alive, it's just been part of my life. And yeah, I mean, Princess Leia was certainly a very iconic figure in my childhood and, now as well. And I think it was just really cool to see a woman with such power and agency and swaggering bravado at the center of the kinds of stories that I really loved, which were these, big epic fantasy stories. That was really important growing up. So yeah, Star Wars has kind of been with me for as long as I can remember.
It's really great, and to add to the likes of Princess Leia with a Dr. Aphra, even though she was created before you wrote the audiobook original, you in some ways you really adapted her true voice, and we got to hear it for the first time and what those words would actually sound like, especially much of her inner dialogue and her inner chaotic thoughts. And she is a ball of chaos. That's like the best way I can describe her. But looking at your career and growing up as a Star Wars fan, did Star Wars play like a pretty large role in leading you to the career that you wanted to follow? I know originally you started in the entertainment industry and you were writing for different publications, but what were some of the challenges navigating that landscape in particular, and then deciding to make the transition to publishing?
Oh, I mean, yeah, I think that certainly Star Wars was part of leading me there. I mean, I was primarily an entertainment journalist, and I wrote a lot about, for lack of a better term, nerd stuff. And, it was a lot of the stuff that I really loved growing up. So Star Wars was certainly part of that. There was a big moment when I was at Backstage, which was kind of my last journalism day job. It's an actors trade magazine. And I actually got to interview Carrie Fisher. And it was over the phone because I think she was, I don't know if she was in a galaxy far, far away, but she was, I think, in a different country. So it was that was really a thrill. That felt like, you know, a big full circle moment just to get to talk to her and kind of tell her what she had meant to me. And I really treasure that memory. And, you know, I mean, as far as challenges, I guess it was kind of the same as, you know, the challenges I faced everywhere, which is existing in the world as a woman of color is very difficult sometimes. And, you know, that certainly spills over into pretty much every industry I've ever been part of.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then as far as transitioning into fiction, you know, I was always a writer. It was always something I loved and always something I wanted to do. But when I was younger, you know, I had a pretty typical Japanese American tiger mom. And, you know, she really wanted me to have a job where I had health insurance and was at least a little bit secure. So I never really saw fiction writing or, you know, creative writing as something that I could pursue. It just didn't seem like a real job. And I guess some people would, you know, still say that it's not. But it took me a long time to get there. And it wasn't really until, you know, I had been doing journalism for a long time and I had kind of always written stories, you know, going back to elementary school. And I guess like the big sort of transitional moment was I was working on this kind of just for fun website and a little zine with some friends called Alert Nerd. And it was kind of just about all the geeky stuff that we liked. And we started this PDF zine that went along with the website. And it was just kind of, you know, whatever we wanted to do. And I wrote a serialized story for that called One Con Glory that was basically a rom-com set at Comic-Con. And it was about a girl who was pursuing a very, very sought-after action figure and kind of all the complications she goes through trying to get there. And that was, you know, just something I wrote for fun. I kind of just wrote it for my friends and myself. And it kind of ended up taking off. It was really cool. It was kind of like, you know, a lot of the nerd girls, I think, who prior to that had mostly seen themselves as stories as sidekicks and love interests and, you know, very disposable, very in the background, I think they felt very seen to sort of see themselves in the story as a protagonist. And that was certainly something that I had always wanted and that I thought was cool. And so I wrote it. And yeah, I kind of ended up getting a bit of a following after that. And everything sort of went from there.
It makes sense too, because it's, you know, you lead right into your heroine complex series, which, you know, is about this superhero taking on all these different threats, and she's really at, you know, Evie is at the front of the story. What was it like to really jump into that writing and kind of launch this long series of books that you're continuing to write?
Yeah, I mean, that was, you know, really cool as well. That was kind of like, you know, I wanted to write something longer. I wanted to write something that was actual novel lengths. One Con Glory ended up being, you know, basically novella length once we put it all together. And I wanted to write a story that was kind of like the stories I had grown up loving, which, you know, are fantasy, science fiction, superheroes, like all of these fantastical things. And the reason, so Evie, who is, you know, the protagonist of the first book and then a big character through the rest of the series, she has my same racial background. She's half Japanese and half white, mixed race, Asian American. And I guess, like, I think I always wish this story was better or braver or something, but it's really not. It's just that when One Con Glory started getting some traction, everybody asked me, or just assumed, that character was Asian because I am. And I hadn't really thought of her that way because I still had not really come around to the idea that someone like me could be centered in a story that wasn't about racism. I still had sort of those, that narrow vision that a lot of us have that's very self-rejecting, just that, we can't be main characters in a story unless it's,
Mm-hmm.
about something bad. So I just thought that character was white. And then I was really surprised that everybody, a lot of other people thought that wasn't the case and thought I had basically written fan fiction about myself. So when I was thinking of these characters for Heroine Complex, I was like, okay, I have this idea. What if instead of following the superhero one, we're basically following her assistant. We're following the person who has to clean up after her and take care of all these messes and sort of the mundane business of being a superhero that you usually don't see on screen or on the page. And when I was sort of figuring out, okay, who is this character? I was like, well, I might as well make her Asian American because everybody's going to think that anyway. And why not just have it from the start, which I think is, again, not the best story, but that's what I did. And it was really only when I was writing that story that I was kind of like, wow, this feels really cool. This feels kind of special to finally have this sort of fun superhero, like really over the top genre story, but it stars, Asian American women. That's pretty cool. And unfortunately kind of rare. So when I really got into it, that's when it started to feel, I guess empowering instead of just a decision I made based off of something else that was, a little bit off the cuff and not necessarily something I thought about a lot. But I've been very honored and touched to hear from readers that has made them feel seen, to sort of have this character who's at the forefront. And all the main characters in those books are pretty much awesome women of color. Most of them are Asian American, and they're on the covers, like they are depicted accurately. The cover artist for that series is Jason Chan. He does a great job. And so it's nice to sort of feel like I'm writing something that is an expression of something that I have always wanted and that makes me feel seen. It's nice to hear from other people that it makes them feel that way as well.
Mm-hmm. Thinking about Star Wars too in that light, when you look at a character like Dr. Aphra, that is a character that many people will feel seen by, right?
Yeah.
And I think too, there's been a lot of Asian characters finally being brought into the Star Wars universe. Like you have Rose Tico, who I'm like the biggest fan of. I love Kelly Marie Tran so much. You have Donnie Yen. You have Christopher Sean playing Kazuda Xiono on Star Wars Resistance, and you have Dr. Aphra, and it's really great to see all these characters get added into the Star Wars universe. So being a Star Wars fan yourself and starting to see that representation come out in the story, and realizing that now the kids growing up with Star Wars have these characters they can look to, like how does that make you feel?
Oh, I mean, it's really cool. It's not something I think that I ever thought I could hope for, or something I even thought was in the realm of possibility. I was just so used to not being in those stories. I was so used to not seeing faces like mine in those stories ever. And so to have that happen, I think we're still kind of at the beginning of that. I think there's still a long way to go, but I feel like it is at least starting to look like a more inclusive version of that galaxy far, far away that a lot of us grew up loving but didn't really see ourselves in. I do remember the moment when Jess Pava was popped on screen, and
Yes.
I remember like that my friend and I, who, she's also a mixed race Asian American, we were like so excited. It was just sort of this immediate moment of seeing that was so amazing. And then of course our first thought was like, she's going to die, because that's usually what happens. So the fact that she actually lived was super amazing. And that's a character who honestly doesn't have very much screen time, but that can still be so important just to see that, just to sort of see that existing in the universe. So I'm hoping we're moving more towards, a world where that's still exciting, but also where some of these characters can really take center stage. And I think that's what's always been so brilliant about Aphra, is she sort of demands to be the main character, even when the comic is called Darth Vader. Like, you really can't take your eyes off of her. She is very centered, and if she's not, she does a good job of centering herself. So I think that's sort of the direction that I would love to see things move in.
Yeah, it's so funny you bring up the idea of, even though it's a Darth Vader comic, it starts to feel like
Yeah.
an Aphra comic because she loves attention. She loves being the center of it. And I think you really get that across in the audio original because I mean, it's obviously it's narrated by her in the first person and her version of things and her unreliability in many ways of telling those stories, but she loves indulgence and she loves the extremes, and I think that really makes her such a lovable character and why so many people can attach themselves to her because she's chaotic. But what did it feel like when you finally found out you would be joining this project and getting to, as you've said, we're kind of in the beginning stages of that sort of representation in Star Wars, and now you're helping to lead the charge by writing an edition of Aphra's story?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. Like I got that email, or I guess like first it was a phone call and then it was an email, but it's just so exciting. Like I think a lot of us who sort of finally get to write stories in this universe probably feel this way. It's such a part of our lives. It's part of our childhoods. It's part of, the general fabric of pop culture. And it was just really cool to hear that. So I got a call from my agent and she said, you have an offer. It's for Star Wars. And I barely heard anything else. But then when she said, and it's for Aphra, that was just so perfect. It felt like it was so meant to be. If there was a character I could choose for myself, it probably would have been her. So yeah, it was just really cool. I mean, I don't even know if I have the words to describe like what that feeling is like. But just the idea that you're going to get to add something to the canon to sort of, this whole pop culture experience that we're all part of was very cool.
And the beautiful thing too about storytelling, at least from my point of view, is you can go into it with certain expectations and come out of it completely shocked or changed in a way that you never thought you could be. So based on your familiarity with Dr. Aphra going into this writing process and then coming out of it, how did that familiarity with Dr. Aphra kind of influence the way in which the story evolved throughout the process, but also like what new things did you take away from the character as a result of that process?
Well, I think like the sort of the big new thing here was just that it was introducing her in a new medium and, perhaps to some people who didn't know who she was or just knew that she was a character from the comics. And, that certainly to me felt like a big responsibility. And I was glad I had that familiarity. I did reread all of the comics and, even the ones that we didn't base this story on, just to kind of get her rhythm and her voice in my head and to sort of see what maybe I thought was missing. And I think, some of the new things I guess I came away with were just like, I felt like because of the audio medium and because we were in her head the whole time, we were very firmly in her POV. I was able to explore some of her vulnerability maybe a little bit more. That felt like, something that has definitely been touched on in the stories that she has already been in, but I felt like that was like such a big opportunity to sort of get to explore like what is underneath all of this bravado and all of this swagger that she's so good at conveying. Like obviously that is an important part of her personality, but I knew there must be a lot more happening that had already been kind of talked about and hinted about in the comics. So that was really, I don't know if fun is the word because so, when she's talking about that stuff, a lot of it is actually, pretty sad. Like
It's pretty
it comes
deep
out
stuff. Yeah.
kind of a sad place where she has to actually admit that, people matter to her and maybe she matters to other people. And I think for her, like as we've seen in some of the comic stories as well, that's always very hard for her to do. So that was like just the kind of thing that is for a writer is so exciting to get to sink your teeth into. And it was also fun to kind of look at that story, like me and my editor at Del Rey, Elizabeth Schaefer, like reread the comics and kind of like figured out, okay, what's here? what's missing, what are some things that we could add to make this seem like, it really is her story, since, even though she was a very prominent part of these comics, they are still called Darth Vader. And how can we sort of bring all of this together so it's a cohesive whole, and it really introduces her in a way that you don't need any prior knowledge for. And there were a lot of things that I think we kind of added into it and enhanced, but the main thing for me was the relationship with Sana Staros, which is a big part of the audiobook.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just something that I had always been interested in. And I guess that's sort of the fun part of, like, when they ask you to write Star Wars and you're already a fan, and they might still say no, but it's your opportunity to kind of say, like, hey, this is something I've always been curious about. Can I explore this?
Right.
And in this case, they said yes. So that was really great. But I thought that was like a cool thing to explore, because I always love writing romance. A lot of my books are somewhere in the romance genre. And I thought that relationship was particularly interesting because they're both really cool characters. They're such badasses in different ways. But a lot of what we've seen from them on the page is the aftermath, when they really hate each other. They're not in that relationship anymore, and Sana really wants to kill Aphra. You can tell there's a lot of bitterness and a lot
Some
of bad
pent up energy after a bit.
yeah. So I kind of wanted to explore, like, what was this like before, because you can tell from the way they act towards each other and the way that they interact that there was something there that was actually quite important, even if Aphra would never admit that. So I was like, well, what does that look like? Like, what does it look like when this sort of, human ball of chaos tries to court someone? What does it look like when she likes someone? And of course, we've seen some of that as well in her relationships, in her relationship in the comics with Magna.
Yes.
Because we'd only seen the aftermath with Sana, I wanted to kind of explore what their before was.
And that was kind of the big question mark heading into this release, because we haven't had, at least to my knowledge, anything that's been turned from a comic into an audiobook and retold in this way. And so my question was, how will it differ? What will be the X factor that's not necessarily explored upon in the Darth Vader comics? And it was that romance, and I'm sure it's very much inspired by some of what you've done with Heroine Complex, because I know you refer to those often as romanticises, but
yeah,
I think it goes back to Aphra's vulnerability, like you mentioned. That's a side of her we've never really explored, and I think it's continued to get explored in the recent comics, especially in the timeline after this story takes place, in some of the Simon Spurrier series and now the Alyssa Wong series as well. Love is really kind of at the core of Aphra's weaknesses, I think. Love from family and kind of her dealings with that growing up, as well as love for Sana Staros and what that looks like. And is she going to reject that love, or is she going to kind of let it into her life and not really see it as a weakness? But I love that vulnerability because it makes her human.
Yes, very much so.
With love being such a central point of the story, like, why do you think this was the right moment to write in that framework of a romance? And did you look to any other romances, either within Star Wars or outside of Star Wars, that helped to inspire your writing as you built these two characters' chemistry together?
Well, I don't know if there's anything that I took like direct inspiration for her from. I mean, I'm certainly, a very regular romance reader. I love romance of all subgenres. And I love Star Wars. So what could be better than those two things together? When I was younger, and I guess still now, I certainly imprinted on Han and Leia. That was sort of a formative romance for me. I watched those scenes a lot, and I read them a lot in the novelizations. And that's kind of your classic, like, hate to love, it's very, there's a lot of banter, like it's very like perfectly done, and is sort of a perfect representation of that trope. And here I don't know if I was really thinking of it in terms of, like, is there a trope, or is there, like, something I'm trying to, like, get across here. It was more about those characters, and it was really about Aphra, and what would kind of lead her to have these feelings, like how those feelings played into the whole story, how they play into the framing device of like how she's making this recording and we don't really know why at first. And a lot of that just came out of thinking about the bigger story, I think there's that great line that Kieran Gillen wrote for her that's something like, the way I've lived, I know I'm lucky to be alive. And I felt like that was really the key to her unlocking that and figuring out like, okay, this person is like so chaotic. She's so, she runs towards all of this danger and all of these thrills, and she doesn't really think about it a lot. She just kind of does what feels good. But at the same time, she obviously has this really hardwired in survival instinct. She actually does want to live. And those two things are often in direct opposition to each other. They're very much in conflict. So I was sort of asking myself this question of like, what would be like, what is that moment like when someone sort of realizes, like, I keep talking about, how I put myself in these dangerous situations and I know I'm going to die soon and I don't really care, but actually I do care. And actually I do really like living and I do want to do that. So
It's a balancing act.
Why?
Yeah.
Like why do I feel that way in this moment? But also like, what are the regrets I would have? And for Aphra, I thought one of those regrets would have to be Sana, because she, I think that it's kind of hinted at in the comic, if maybe not fully explored, but I felt like there was kind of this idea that Sana just outright wanting to kill her and not even really looking at her, and sort of like being so obviously hurt by her, even with who Aphra is and how flippant she tries to act. I felt like, well, that I think that would bother her. Like she would sort of want Sana to know that, that she did care, that this did matter, that there was something to this. So it kind of like grew around that, and those two ideas kind of grew together very naturally. And I think with all romance, one thing that I love about romance, and one reason I think that writers of any genre, if you want to write, any kind of relationship, should read some romance, is that in romance, you really have to keep track of what those characters' feelings are at every stage, what and how they're evolving. And so, here it was maybe a little bit truncated because we didn't have like the space of a whole novel to explore that. But I really tried to keep track of that in sort of the flashbacks where we see the build of their relationship, so that we could really buy that, yes, these two people did have a deeper connection. There was really something there. And that's why there's so much bitterness and hatred in the aftermath. And so making that arc and the feelings of those two characters work, I really had to keep track of both of the, like, what they were both feeling in every single scene. And that's something that I also do when I am constructing or revising the romance threads in my books.
I love romance in Star Wars. I wish there was like romance. I mean, I guess there's romance in pretty much all of the movies to some element, but I especially love it when it's in books and in just every medium possible, because I love hugging and I love all the kisses in Star Wars. I want more of it. And I think there are just so many great moments in this book that felt authentic, because like the times that Aphra just keeps falling over and stumbling over herself, I'm like, those are definitely things I would do. And I relate to that.
Yeah, she's very, very thrown by being attracted to someone, because she definitely doesn't want that.
Yeah, you bring up a really great point too about this, again, that balancing act of, I really like adventure, but I also like leisure and living. And she's like, why can't I have both those things? I forget the exact line, but it's something like that. And it kind of made me wonder in terms of like the hero's journey, right? Like Star Wars is so inspired by the hero's journey. And I was trying to think of like what Aphra's hero's journey looks like, or maybe anti-hero, or however you might describe her. But there's always that central dramatic question of like, what is the purpose of this hero's journey? Like, what are they trying to learn that they hadn't known before, right? And that's kind of their spiritual transformation that they go through. So like, what do you think for Aphra? Like, what does her ultimate transformation look like? Like, what's for someone that thrives on so much chaos, can she ever be truly fulfilled? Can she ever really have that spiritually uplifting ending? Or is it going to be this constant seesaw her entire life?
I don't know. I think that Aphra would definitely like reject the idea of the hero's journey. Like I feel like that she would just decide that was not for her. I mean, I think her sort of moment of transformation and revelation in this short tale from her life is that she has to at one point admit to herself that she cares. And then, of course, she immediately rejects it and, says she's going to erase that part of the recording and all of that. But I think that is like a big moment when she really realizes that she cares and she does want to keep living this life. And, all these things that she's been so flippant about are actually matter. And I think that's something a lot of us go through, especially those of us who maybe use bravado or use humor as this sort of defense mechanism because it means we never have to take anything seriously. So
I relate to that so much.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us do, right? It's like, so for her, she's sort of like, wow, I definitely don't want to think about that. I don't want to think about anything serious or admit that anything matters. But in the greater sense, I mean, I think that her journey is just, if she can just keep like sort of living this awesome life for as long as possible. I think that one thing that's come up a lot in interviews I've done for this book is that she's maybe one of the few characters in Star Wars who's always like having the best time. Like she's always living her best life. She's having so much fun. Like she's doing exactly what she wants to do because she doesn't really see the point in doing anything else. And, a lot of our very classic heroes in Star Wars, they have their moments where they're having a good time, but a lot of the rest of it is not super fun. Like trying to save the galaxy is not super fun. There's a lot of angst that goes with that. So I think if she could just keep being sort of herself and having a good time being herself, then I feel like however her life ends, she will feel fulfilled in her journey.
She is unabashedly herself, and that's, I think, what I love the most about her. Your idea of her rejecting the hero's journey makes me laugh because I think of her in some like ancient library and she picks up a Joseph Campbell book and like reads 2 sentences and goes, nah, I don't like that, and like chucks it off and whatever. But I think with her, she just has such funny moments where even throughout the comics and in this, where she's always after that prized possession, and that is kind of like her having the best time of her life at all points, right? She wants to find that next treasure, and she's not stealing anything. She's preserving it is her liberating. Motto. Liberating, yes. And I want to know from your perspective, like how when you boil her down to like all of her different characteristics, like why do you think she just truly stands out? Like what is it about Aphra that is unlike any other character? Is it just the having a good time all the time, or is there even more to it that maybe is beneath the surface?
I mean, yeah, I think like it's a lot of, what we've been talking about. She is so chaotic. She is having the best time. She's not really like other characters in Star Wars who maybe have more, purely heroic or purely villainous journeys. She's, kind of all over the place, and she really won't let you put her in a box. So I think there's something that feels very fresh and very, very liberating about that. And she also has kind of this interesting, like, modern sensibility. Like, you can really see how brilliant it was for Kieran to create her and then introduce her in the Darth Vader comics, because he doesn't talk very much. He's very serious all the time. He's obviously a very compelling, iconic character, but on a comic book page, you kind of need someone to bounce off of that who can bring it to life a little bit more. And I think that's absolutely what she did. So there's just something about her that pops immediately, like as soon as she's on the page, and she just kind of does what she wants and what feels good. And I think that's something that we maybe haven't seen a ton of in Star Wars, or even in, big franchises. So I think that's very refreshing. And then I think the modern sensibility also kind of helps us feel like, even though maybe we wouldn't do everything that she would do, she's kind of our way in. Like, she's sort of like this more modern seeming person who's commenting on all things Star Wars. I think there's one point where she says something about like a weekend or a holiday or a vacation, and you're like, oh, does that, did those sort of, everyday like modern concepts, do those exist in Star Wars? Like, do they have a weekend in Star Wars? I guess they do, because Aphra just commented on it. So I think there's a lot about her that is just super appealing and super different. And, because she is like a queer Asian woman in this canon, she also, I think, makes a lot of people feel seen. Again, like we were talking about before,
Yeah.
like feel seen in this property that a lot of us have loved all of our lives, but maybe have not felt particularly present in.
Hmm. What a person too to bring this character to life in Emily Wu Zeller. I mean, just absolutely incredible. And that's one of my biggest takeaways is now I have a voice for Aphra. When I read the comics, I have a voice in my head finally. And
Yeah.
the way she brought her to life was just phenomenal. What did the casting process look like? Do you kind of cast first and then help influence the work after that, or did you have somebody in mind like initially where you're like, that's who I want to play Aphra and I'm going to try my best for it?
Well, I actually had no idea who was in the cast. I wasn't really part of that process. Like, that was,
Hmm.
I think especially with big license products like this, you're just like, cool, they've got it covered. Like that's,
Gotcha.
that's what they're doing. So Nick Martorelli, who is the amazing producer of this audiobook, I think did a lot of that. And the cast, I mean, they are incredible. There's a lot of voices that you've heard before in Star Wars and actors you've heard before in Star Wars. And Emily, it was exciting that they cast her. And I think, I don't think I found out who was in the cast actually until they were all done recording. I think I found out that Emily was in the cast when we were like right before we were doing that panel for Comic-Con. And what was kind of fun about that was, I knew who Emily was because she is a very popular, very in-demand Asian American audiobook reader. So like a lot of my friends have had books performed by her. Like, she's someone who's kind of been on my radar for a long time. And what was sort of fun about that was, I think just a week or two prior to me getting that email where it was like, here's who's in the cast, Emily Wu Zeller is playing Aphra. We had actually cast her to read the Heroine Complex books.
Oh, wow.
There was a deal that was for audio of the whole series, so they're producing the whole series. And I think in the contract I had approval of whoever was going to narrate, because obviously that's a big job, and the series has a very distinctive voice, and you want that to be right. So they sent me some samples of different readers, different actors who specialized in audiobooks, and most of them were Asian American. And they're like, okay, here's some samples, listen to these. And I remember they said to me, if you can, please give us like a few options or like ranked options, just so, just in case like scheduling doesn't work out for whoever you want, and then we'll go from there. And I was like, of course, I'm very professional. Like, of course I would do that. And then I listened to the samples, and I wrote back and I was like, I'm sorry. It really has to be this person. And if you can do everything in your power to get Emily Wu Zeller to read these books, I just don't think there's another choice for me. And they
Hmm.
were like, no, we got it. It's important. Let's see what we can do. And so I think it was literally the week before I found out that she was Aphra that I got the email saying like, okay, we got Emily, like she's excited, she's going to do all the books. So it was just really cool. And she is amazing, obviously. And I love her performance. And I feel like, especially considering that pretty much all of the actors recorded in their houses separately,
Hmm.
because the pandemic. And I think for Dooku they were able to record in a studio together, and that was originally going to be the plan with this, but with the pandemic obviously that couldn't happen, so they all recorded in their houses. And I think Nick Martorelli, the producer, read all the other parts like opposite them, so that I think on the panel we were like, oh, release the Martorelli cut. Like that's going to be
Yeah.
thing. And I think the only things they recorded people together for was they were able to get Emily and Nicole Lewis, who plays Sana, to record some of the Sana Aphra scenes together, so they could
Oh,
get
wonderful.
that. Like I think they recorded them on Zoom. So just the fact that like they did all that and it still sounds like all of those people are recording together, I think is incredible. And you know, Emily really had the toughest job. I mean, she had to read 300 pages of internal monologue, and I feel like she really killed it. And I think, you know, like you, that is Aphra's voice now. That is the only thing I hear. And I think it's exciting that for a lot of people, she will, you know, when they hear Aphra or they imagine Aphra talking, they'll hear her.
Mm-hmm. I love that you bring up the point, and I think Nick mentioned it in the Comic-Con panel as well, about how when he would flip the script, it's like, oh, it's more Aphra. Oh, it's more Aphra. It's more
Yeah.
Aphra. And it's a little different than Dooku, right? Because Dooku is
Yeah.
this constant back and forth between different characters, and then it brings up the idea of the unreliable narrator, which is such a prominent presence in Star Wars from so many different characters and telling things in a first person point of view. So from your perspective, would you like to see more Star Wars stories told in this light? And like, what do you think is the importance of an unreliable narrator in this universe? Like, what does it bring that's kind of that extra pizzazz?
Well, I mean, I would love to see like all kinds of Star Wars stories told all different ways. I think that's like one of the most exciting things about this big giant franchise with many sort of different media components is you can kind of tell all of these different stories, and whatever is sort of the best format for a story can sort of be how it lives. And so for this, it was interesting because we did, like, I think that was really the first choice we made. That was that this was going to be firmly in her POV. It was going to be her voice telling us this story. And that was obviously really fun because I feel like it really conveyed Aphra better than, you know, someone observing her from the outside, I think, ever could. Like, I think like she would obviously want to tell this story herself. So I think that was really fun. And then as far as like the unreliable narrator part, that was something that Elizabeth really encouraged me to take advantage of, in particular, the fact that this was in the audio medium. So it was like, there are things that you can do that maybe wouldn't make sense in a different medium, like in prose or comics or whatever. So she was like, you know, really think about how you can use that. Like, what are, especially since you have this conceit of like, she's making this recording, like how would that sort of express itself? And so that was where we got things like, you know, her rewinding the recording and recording it again so she sounds better, or like marking spots for deletion or things like that. And I just thought, you know, obviously this character, like if she gets to tell the story, she's going to make herself look as awesome as possible. So I really wanted to take advantage of that, while at the same time hopefully telegraphing to readers like, okay, you can gather from what is here what actually happened. Like it's not like you're getting a fake version of events. You're getting a real version of events. It's just filtered through someone's lens, but hopefully you can still tell like what is actually happening. So that was just really fun because it was just this idea of like, if someone like Aphra was like making this recording, like how would she do it? Obviously she would have a lot of like judicious editing and sort of puffing herself up and all of that. So, you know, that was really fun. And I think like, I'd love to see more stories in Star Wars where you sort of do different things with mediums, or like do different things because of the specificity of the character, or like whatever it is. I look forward to seeing more of that.
I hope we get one of these a year, and at this pace, it seems like that might be the case. But fingers crossed, and certainly love to see you come back in some format and write some more Star Wars.
Oh, thanks.
My last question for you on the Aphra story would be, looking at what you've been able to give to this character and pull from what's come before, what do you ultimately hope is the legacy of Aphra for Star Wars? I know it's a pretty like big question, but what do you really feel are her core components for when people will remember her and continue to talk about her?
Well, I think it's, you know, it's pretty incredible that she became so popular so fast. that they're they're like amazing like Aphra cosplayers that you can sort of point out by name, I think is just really cool. And I guess I hope that she just she keeps getting to have her fun adventures, and that they get told by a lot of different writers, because she's very fun to write, and I'm happy for other people to have that experience. I hope that I get to write her again at some point. And I just hope that it's sort of going back to that thing of like that she continues to make people feel seen, and that hopefully putting her in some different mediums makes her influence spread a little bit wider. I know a lot of people have talked about how they would love to see her in a show or a movie, or sort of make that debut on screen in Star Wars. I think that would be really cool. But I just think it's even if her legacy was just what already exists, it would already be really cool, and she would already stand out a lot and inspire cosplayers for generations to come. So I just kind of hope that there continues to be more of her, and that she is able to sort of go into different mediums and be introduced to new people who maybe don't know her yet. And that, she keeps getting to live her best life in the galaxy.
Absolutely. I think she'll continue to live on. And I know in some respects, Ahsoka really took off in Star Wars and really became such a household name. And I think Aphra has that kind of trajectory. And I think people really cling on to her and really love her. And again, it's just all the characteristics we've talked about and the stories that she gets involved in, and the constant, like, how does she get out of that? How does she do that? She's not a Force user. She's not a great pilot. She's not a whatever. She's just an average archaeologist that has a really good like intelligence for getting out of traps and getting out of these crazy situations. And she's just fantastic all around. Well, to wrap up the show, we like to do some rapid fire questions. It's not pop quiz or anything, but just some extra questions to really get to know you a little better. So my first question for you is, we've talked a lot about Aphra, but in Star Wars overall, what Star Wars film speaks the most to you?
Oh, I mean, it's probably still Empire. I think that, that was the case for me for a long time. And because that's been my favorite since I was very small, I don't know if that could ever change. But I do have certainly very warm feelings for many of them, and, have probably rewatched them more than any other movies. But Empire, I think, is still special. I think it has that very dramatic romance that I love so much. It ends on a cliffhanger, which was like so wild, like back
Yes.
in the day. And I think it really like brings out all of the characters in a way that was very appealing to me. So it's probably still that one.
Great. So Aphra is a very quotable character. So I wanted to know, is there a Star Wars quote that really sticks in with you the most and that you kind of always go back to when you think of the franchise?
That's a good question. I don't know if there's like a specific quote, which is funny because I feel like one of the things that nerds love to do is like quote lines at each other of, anything that we like. I don't know if there's a specific line. I think that certainly as a youth, I lived by all of Princess Leia's dialogue, just because I felt like she was like, so aggressive, which I think is like cool and was not really the case for, a lot of the other kind of heroes I was seeing or female heroes I was seeing in the franchises of that time. So, I mean, like Princess Leia and Lois Lane in the Christopher Reeve Supermans were sort of my idol. So I feel like just that sort of aggressiveness, that it might not even be so much the lines as the way that Carrie Fisher says the lines, that has certainly stuck with me forever.
Absolutely. Carrie Fisher is one for words, and even some of her writing as well is just so funny and so great. And I miss her dearly every single day.
Yeah,
But
I know.
yeah, her legacy does live on though. Every one of the words she's ever spoken in Star Wars is just so great.
Yeah.
If you had to use a single word to describe Dr. Aphra, which one would you use?
I mean, I think it would have to be chaos. Like that just like kind of sums her up in a nutshell and really says it best.
Yeah. So I know you're, or at least I assume you are, a big Birds of Prey fan.
Yes.
I've seen some posts from you that give that indication. And I want to know, do you see any similarities between Dr. Aphra and Harley Quinn? I feel like there's a little bit of a Venn diagram between the two, and there definitely is some overlap in the middle.
Oh yeah.
I
I mean,
feel like those characters are just like really mesh well together. I want to see them as a crossover.
yeah, no, I agree. I think, there is that anarchy, there's that sense of chaos, there's that sense of like empowerment, but on their own terms. Like it's maybe not what we classically think of as empowerment, but it is
Hmm.
because that is on their own terms. Yeah, I would love to see. I think someone mentioned that on Twitter, like what would happen if they met each other. And I sort of like, because they are so similar in certain ways. I just wonder. I think my question was like, would they fight or would they sleep together? Would they kill each other? Would they do all of those things? I feel like they're both such creatures of excess. They would probably do like everything you can imagine. So that would certainly be a lot of fun.
I want to see somebody write that fan fiction at least, so I would read it. We talked about Aphra being brought into live action at some point. Maybe that would happen in the future. Is there anybody in your mind that you would fan cast or would like to maybe see take up the mantle of Aphra?
I don't know. I think that it would maybe have to be a search that involved both established actresses and newcomers, and really finding that perfect chaotic energy. I think would be a challenge. But I think there are a number of actresses who are up to the task. I think it used to be that people could really only name one Asian American actress, and that's certainly not, hopefully, not true anymore. So the fact that there could be like a number of contenders is exciting to me. And I would love to see that. I would love to see kind of what she looks like and how she would come to life on screen. And I don't think that I have like a certain person in mind, but I feel like there could be a lot of good options for that.
Mm-hmm. It's a very fair answer, and I'm excited if that ever happens to see who they choose. So I'm waiting. I want to know, has Aphra taught you anything about yourself, or at least maybe the process of writing her, right? Because I think every project you can kind of pull like a new thing about what you're doing or take value from or find meaning in.
Like one thing it taught me was that I could write that fast because most projects like this where it's licensed and it's a big property, a lot of times the deadlines are pretty quick, pretty close together. I think I got that job in like November, late November maybe, and then we were done by maybe March. And that was like, all revisions and everything. So I guess it taught me that I could like write pretty fast.
I hear that a lot with Star Wars authors. It's always like, I had to do this very fast. I had like almost no time, but it was like, you did it.
It's like a thrill. I mean, I guess you're kind of like Aphra. You're like pushing yourself through the chaos and the thrills, and you kind of just have to go for it and hope that it turns out okay. And obviously, like Elizabeth, my editor, was so amazing and really helped and like made sure that like those timelines worked, and she's just awesome. So
yeah. So I want to know, among the Star Wars projects that have been announced, is there anything in particular that you are very excited for?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that like, I love it all. I especially, it's exciting now, I think, because there are so many amazing authors and writers that I can count as friends who are also getting to play in this universe. I was so excited to hear that Alyssa Wong was gonna get to do her take on Aphra and to put her voice into that. Like that was super cool, and I've really been enjoying the run on that comic. And one of my best friends is Amy Ratcliffe, who's written a lot of Star Wars stuff and has some more books coming out. And it's been really cool to sort of like get to see that and get to talk to her about it. And I got to use she wrote that that really cool like coffee table book that's sort of
The
like
Women of the Galaxy.
yeah.
Yeah,
So that book I think is just
beautiful.
beautiful. And what was fun about that was like I got to use I've been able to use it twice now for research. So I got to use it for Aphra, like just to kind of check the basic bio and the facts that were canon and like stuff like that. And then I also there was a novella in the Heroine Complex series called Unsung Heroine, which was about a very popular side character. And the romance in that was like she's trying to sort of woo this woman that she's had a crush on forever, and like it's like, will they get together? Will they not get to, like, what's going to happen? And part of their sort of when they're sort of first like getting to know each other, she finds out that this woman she has such a big crush on is like kind of a secret geek, and her passion is that she writes fan fiction about Padme and the Handmaiden. And so she's like talking about that. And so like I was like, oh, like let me just look up Padme and the Handmaidens in Amy's book so I can get all the facts that I need. So yeah, that was a long way of saying probably anything written by my friends.
And my last question for you is, what does Star Wars ultimately mean to you?
Oh, I would say hope. I mean, I think like what is still deeply resonant about that is that, that line that, rebellions are built on hope. Like just this sort of idea that and I think probably a lot of us need this right now, when things seem like they're really bad, when it just seems like you aren't going to get a win, when it seems like everything is hopeless, there are still people who are fighting really hard to make things right. And if you're tired of fighting, there's someone else who's getting up there to fight on your behalf. And so I think that is a very powerful message that has endured for years and years and years. And so when I think of Star Wars, I think the first thing I think of is hope, and how stories can kind of give us that and give us the reason to keep fighting and keep going.
Absolutely. I think Star Wars is that. I think you said it exactly perfect. And it feels so important in today's age. And I look to Star Wars for hope so often, like when I feel down in the dumps, I always go back to this story, and that's the reason, I think, because it's just filled with that. And it gives you a picture of like, even in the darkest times, there is still a bit of light. And I go back to Leia's quote to end on. One of my favorite quotes from her is, hope is like the sun. If you only believe in it when you see it, you'll never make it through the night. So that's like,
yes,
I think just the best Star Wars quote ever. Honestly, it's just so good.
Very good one. Yes.
Yeah. So Sarah, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was such a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to come on Friends of the Force. So last thing I'd like to ask you is, where can people find you online to follow your work, and what do you have coming up that you can discuss?
Yeah. So I'm on Twitter a lot. Probably when I'm on there a lot, it's because I'm supposed to be doing something else. But I'm just, I'm just my name on there, Sarah Kuhn, Kuhn. On Instagram, I'm Sarah Kuhn Books. And I do have a website that I think probably I need to update several times. But that's just heroinecomplex.com. That's heroin like superheroine, not like the drug. And as far as other projects, we just released the 4th book of Heroine Complex. It's called Haunted Heroine. It's set during Halloween. And I'm working on the next book in that series, which will come out next year. I also, earlier this year, we released from DC a graphic novel called Shadow of the Batgirl, which, speaking of Birds of Prey, is about Cassandra Cain. And that was with the artist Nicole Gu. It's another, awesome character that I love. And then I just had another graphic novel come out with the artist J-Bone that is actually an Archie middle grade. So it's a graphic novel about Betty and Veronica in middle school with all their friends. It's very cute. That just came out. And then, yeah, just working on some secret stuff and working on some stuff for next year.
Awesome. Well, I'm so excited to see what comes down the pipe. And again, fingers crossed that you return back to the Star Wars universe. We need you.
Thank you very much.
With that being said, Sarah, may the Force be with you.
Thank you, and you as well.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Friends of the Force. Make sure wherever you're listening to rate us 5 stars and leave a review. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And consider joining our Patreon at patreon.com/Friends of the Force. We have some major changes coming up very, very soon to Patreon, so you're going to want to check that out. Thank you to our current patrons, Amy, Anna, Cheryl, Deborah, Donnie, Ella G, Marie Claire, Neil, Rachel, Sarah, and T. So that is all for this week. We will see you next time here at Friends of the Force, and until then, we are one with the Force. We are Friends of the Force, and may the Force be with you always.
Friends of the Force is a proud member of the Star Wars Escape Pods network. To learn more about our sister shows, find us on Twitter at WeAreEscapePods. The Star Wars Escape Pods network, promoting positivity in fandom.